Hello everyone. Today we are going to discuss about DevSecOps. It's an interesting topic because DevSecOps has become a pillar of modern application development. To discuss this topic, I also have two friends, Satish and Sarath from Flying Duck. They are the founders of Flying Duck, a company that dedicatedly focus on DevSecOps. So welcome Satish and Sarath.
ICP.
Thank you.
Thanks for inviting us.
So first, let's see quickly the basics of DevSecOps and how security works in DevSecOps, both in an agile way or an ad hoc way, as well as in a fully automated way. Then we will get into a quick conversation with the experts who breathe in and out about DevSecOps. So we all know that traditional application development used to be done in a waterfall model, which got evolved into an agile model, and then which eventually now got evolved into a DevSecOps. And the rise of DevOps happened in such a way that the modern application development approach that seamlessly integrate the three components, development, security, and operations, which used to be at different areas into one. And it requires and highlights the need for collaboration, automation, and shared responsibility between software developers, security testers, and people who operate the infrastructure. It promotes security at every stage. So the idea was to shift left and do as much automation as possible so that it becomes agile and the speed of delivery becomes faster, wherein the number of changes that are happening in the applications are way too many, sometimes more than one in a day. The features of typically integrated DevSecOps were that it will have more frequent and automated deployments, much shorter lead times, increased adoption of infrastructure, security, compliance security, as well as security as a code, and automation of the secure DevOps. While this was always the vision, but there were a lot of challenges in achieving a fully automated and secure DevOps that is integrated in each stage of the pipeline and gives you assurance as well as ensure a baseline security is applied to the code as well as to the infrastructure. So if we have to look at it, we look at ad hoc security. And let's take this an example that how it works in an automated or semi-automated environment with ad hoc security and a DevOps. Typically, a user story gets assigned to a developer. The developer is going to write that code to automate or code that security. He uses tools like Eclipse, which is an IDE. Once he uses IDE, writes a 1 or 2 MB of code, then he integrates or commit that code into any version control systems like Git or GitHub. And then this kit goes compiled, built, and pushed to the test environment. Then it is tested, digitally signed artifacts are stored. And along with functional testing, sometimes SaaS tools are integrated. They start with SonarQube, and the output of the SaaS also comes into the centralized tracking system. And from it, the test environment, the latest build is moved to the staging for application user acceptance testing, where most of the time DAS tools are integrated like that of WebInspect or Burp. And once the testing build is deployed into the production, and then a typical application pen test happens, and post deployment, you continue to do continuous monitoring, vulnerability, and security assessment. And all of this goes into a defect tracking tools. And from defect tracking tools, all the identified issues are reported and sent back to the developer. Generally, when we talk about ad hoc security, we see that SaaS tools are integrated to do code reviews, identify the known vulnerabilities. Typically, they focus on OWASP top 10, which include DAS tools too. And then there are certain bad, security practices and configuration issues, including open source, that are all integrated. Now, once all of this goes into a central systems like Defect Dojo, then they are integrated with the defect tracking tools like Jira, and then they get back to the developers as an defects which are assigned, and then they start working on it. Now, this is very ad hoc in nature, and it presents a lot of challenges. The first challenge that they have is that there are too many false positives, and then developers spend a lot of time and then they tend to ignore or subside these findings. The second is that security is not completely automated. It's certain process making it manual to remove false positives, identify true positives, have proof of concepts, and then to give it to the developers. This completely defeats the purpose of having an agile and faster development cycles. The third is that remediation is not known to the developer. While outcome of SAST and DAS tools might ask for patching, changing configurations, but how to really implement that into the code is something that developers are looking for. Say, for example, a simple thing like a SQL injection, which requires a parameterized query, but how that query has to be built into the code has to be known. A fourth and final is that there are just too many findings that are coming up into the developer's kit from the defect dojo. There has to be appropriate removal of true positives and risk align what matters the most and goes to the developer so that they can fix it. And in a nutshell, doing all of this in as much automated way as possible so that the agility and faster code to production can happen. So let's look at how an automated security looks like in a DevSecOps environment. When you have an integrated security in the same fashion or DevSecOps, you integrate a security check at the ID level itself, which means that when the developers are writing code and they want to commit, there is a small plugin that can provide a real-time guidance on as the code is written to have security built into it. It can be very simple things. If you do too many checks, it will unnecessarily delay. But simple checks like secrets management or say, for example, hard-coded passwords are scanned here itself so that developers don't do those mistakes. If there are limited number of rules which are identifying only critical true positives like hard-coded passwords or basic input validations is what something that will matter the most. Now, once the code is committed, then you can do an automatic trigger using plugin for source code review tools like checkmarks, which can perform fast incremental scan for critical and high-risk issues like top three vulnerabilities, and also run an OWSP dependency checker or any other open source security tools to identify vulnerabilities in open source and copyright issues. Then once it is committed to the build stage, you can do component level scans for all OWSP top 10 and also integrate publicly disclosed vulnerabilities. Then once the code is completely developed and gone into the test environment, you can do a full SAS scan and also do security for configuration checks. And the ops, you can do a full dash scan as well as you can do assessments using where various tools and identify operational issues like container vulnerabilities, east-west traffic using Imperva or Cloudflare. And all of this getting integrated along with container security. And then these tools are centralized and automated and goes to the developer. So this is real left security, wherein security is getting integrated in various pipeline of DevOps and working in an automated way so that false positives are removed, true positives and remediation advices are going into the developer. So as much automated we can make along with having some sort of two eyes or four eyes to identify and remove false positives is better. Now, the next component comes that how can we really secure infrastructure, secure the cloud as infrastructure as code, policy as a code, as a compliance as a code. So we can say secret ingredient is that as much changes you want to automate in the infrastructure with DevOps will help into security. For example, if we are automating a spin-off of a container and an implementation of the application in that, then the security can be automated where it can detect application changes and it can open the port and create the object. But along with that, it also does the monitor east-west traffic and do the container security assessment. So we can leverage the tools like Ansible playbooks to automate the firewall management, and the credentials can be put into the Ansible tower. And then we can also automate using Terraform scripts. The second is compliance as a code, wherein if we know there are instances, including storage resources that are there, and if we want to comply with policies for minimum security baselines, SSH-based scans, baseline security of having unauthorized services and misconfigurations or improper settings, then all of this can be automated so that automated remediation also flows with a click of button. And last is policy as a code to ensure that we are applying the security policies consistently to all the pipelines by writing the code to manage rules and conditions. And these policies can be written in languages like Python, YAML, or Rego, and then it can also be automated using various tools like Chekhov and AWS config. So with that short briefing, I will stop here. And we still see there are a lot of challenges in terms of integration and automation. So I will invite Sarath and Satish to help us with that. So Sarath, Satish, welcome to this discussion.
ICP, yeah.
Yeah. So my first question is that while most people believe that we need to automate all the integrations and all the security tools to be integrated in day one, they want to integrate SaaS, DAS, secure image using ID integration to make DevSecOps work automatically. But we all know that there is a lot of maturity that is required. It requires certain training to developers. It also requires certain maturity and understanding of security to shift left and cultural issues. So what is the right approach to ensure that there is a consistent maturity across all the pipelines in the enterprises, considering that we might also have various teams as well as various pipelines to ensure that security is consistently applied to all the pipelines and it is mature over a period of time?
Yeah, rightly you said, CP. We are also seeing that, while automation of DevSecOps is certainly critical, like you very well mentioned, it's also important to ensure that it's done in a phased approach, right? So we are actually seeing a lot of companies started their journey, with some set of tools. But then doing the full automation obviously takes time, and it actually leads to frustration if you want to do it everything on day one, right? Because there's a lot of tools, within this whole process, and there's a lot of vulnerabilities and all kinds of issues that could lead, that could really become blockers if this is not done in a proper way. Right? So what we think is the first thing that needs to be done is to establish a framework that suits the organization, and then identify the security champions within the dev teams who could really uh, drive and resolve or identify these security issues as part of this process, because every organization is different, and every DevSecOps or every DevOps environments are different as well. From our experience, I can quote a couple of clients here. One of our fintech clients, they wanted to deploy the tools within the CI/CD pipeline itself to start with, because again, not in a blocking mode, but just in a monitoring mode. They just wanted to see what kind of issues are coming up. They've integrated for SAST, DAST, SCA, etc. And they wanted to see how that goes into the pipelines first, and then give it to the developers. Interestingly, the other client, they wanted to give it to the developers first, identify these issues from day one itself, and then slowly mature to get into the pipelines, and then start looking at the pipelines if they want to block it, if they want to pass through. So it just varies on type of the organization. But again, the slow process, the phased approach is quite critical as we see.
Yeah. So you rightly said, Sarath, I think there are two schools of thought. One is that let's integrate all the tools and let the outcome comes, and then we can take one at a time and mature it. So let's mature, say, the outcome of SAST and DAST, remove false positives, and put some remediation advice and integrate into Jira, while other tools might be giving the outputs. The other school of thought is that we have to identify security champions, train them, do some trainings as well as programs like code bashing, and then integrate SAST and DAST to start with so that they have less number of false positive and let them learn and mature over a period of time, and then integrate other tools. Well, this can be one option, but it may take 6 to 8 months or sometimes more than that. And also, you might miss a lot of opportunities to ensure that security is integrated end to end. While in the first school of thoughts, while you might be feeling that the tools are there and integration is there, but it gives false sense of security because the tools are neither effectively nor it is being acted by developers, either because they don't understand all the real remediation advice that they need to execute, or they will just subside the findings considering that it's too many false positives.
Yeah, very true, very true.
Yeah. So, Sarath, because firms are also using multiple CI/CD pipelines, some can be on the cloud like Azure or AWS, and we see people start with that, and some are in-premise, and some are open source based. So they also will have different maturity levels because the teams are different, the products are getting developed, which are different. Some are for internal use, some are real products, and some are just customized. Then what is the best approach to ensure that we have consistent governance, consistent security policy enforcement, and there is some centralized way to apply and monitor the security across all the pipelines? Because we cannot have an DevSecOps policy, but it is being applied very inconsistently, and the tools are also integrated very inconsistently across multiple pipelines. So, what are your thoughts on how we can have consistent tool sets of SCS, SAS, DAS, as well as apply consistent policies for scanning and remediation before really moving the code to the production? So, what are your thoughts on having consistent governance across multiple pipelines for an organization?
Satish, you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. I think I'll just add one point here, Siddhi. So the biggest challenge is like, the enterprise are giving flexibility to the different teams, right? Because they want to innovate, speed fast, right? They want to, plan to go to market. They want to innovate, and they want to just do a lot of research on the products, and they want to be, the game changers. So they are giving a lot of freedom to the developers, and what we have seen with a couple of organizations, they are letting even the developers to run their own DevSecOps pipelines, right? So while this is one a great way for adding some innovation, it also gives a lot of challenges because not the developers are like they want to develop the code first, right, rather than focusing on the security. And now they have their own kind of practices, because based on the technologies or whatever the practices they know, so they start following their own practices. So which might actually lead to a lot of challenges. So it's very important for us to kind of create a framework which is probably common across the development teams, right? So that they can stick to one kind of process. And at the same time, it's very important for any organization to pick up some tools which can actually help in implementing this DevSecOps journey, right? So if you look at the security, it has got multiple things like as bombs, SCA, pipeline governance, a lot of these things. And usually, what companies do, they start with open source tools. And the problem with open source tools, they focus on very one small thing, and you might have to pick too many tools to implement the DevSecOps, and the integration becomes very big challenge there. So it's very important for us to also pick up the right tools, right? Which are easy for integration, right? With the different things like as you mentioned, yeah, definitely people are using cloud. There are people still put a lot of I would say investments on their own data centers and all of that. So it's very important to pick the right tools as well, which supports multiple options, and not to be specific, like focusing on one area, because the moment you start onboarding too many tools at one certain point of time, it becomes very tedious to manage all of these tools. So picking up the right tool is also very important, which gives at least let's say cover the entire code security, for example, right? Or covers the entire cloud security, right? And then also be able to integrate with other tools easily, right? So that you can have the governance streamlined. Maybe you can have single pane of visibility for all of these things. So right, so that your monitoring can become easy and then optimized. So I think that's the most important.
Got it. Sure. Yeah. So we also discussed earlier in the presentation that one of the critical factor is false positive, and this is really failing the automation itself, because developers then tend to get flooded with too many outcomes, which then they start to miss or ignore the findings, and sometimes it's so irrelevant that they start to subside. So how do we address this problem? It looks like, the only way to address this problem is manual intervention. And then the automation starts failing, and the manual intervention may take, let's say, half a day to one day, depending on how many findings are there. So, are there ways and means by using, say, machine learning or AI, or marking them as false positives, so that over a period of time, you have right true positives which are risk-based, so the developer can focus where it matters the most, and then directly getting integrated into Jira. Along with that, the second issue is that can they get a better remediation outcome by this automation, so that they not only focus on the problem but also the solution and solve it.
Yeah, great question, CP. False positives, as you know, is pretty common with any kind of security tools, and they're more of policy-based rather than context-based. And if you see, around 50, just with SCA and SAST within the DevSecOps, there are reports from Gartner about 40 to 50% of identified issues are false positives, right? So this is really a big problem, especially for the developers, where they cannot understand many of these issues on why they are given by the security teams, and also they're pretty much flooded in trying to resolve them, right? So yeah, definitely with AI and machine learning, with even with Gen AI, we can solve a certain percentage of false positives. In fact, we are doing that, which is the industry term as reachability analysis, right? So we can identify which issues apply to your code base that are exploitable, and then present them to the developers, right? So that they can just focus on the issues that matters most to them. Along with that, you also touched upon a very important aspect about remediation, right? If you see, developers spend a lot of time in identifying the issues, now that they don't have a lot of visibility into the false positives. That's one thing. But then once identified, they have to do a ton of research on how to remediate these issues, such as understanding the dependency structure. For example, if you take Log4j, right? It was acting as a dependency, it was acting as a package, so they have to understand the CVEs associated with it. What are the changes that could break when they do the upgrades? And how are these impacting their code base? So they have to do a lot of research. So giving them precise remediation, which is actionable, really matters to the developers to be able to fix these problems. Ultimately, our goal, anyone's goal, is to not just identification, but also helping them to fix these problems. So giving that opportunity to the developers, giving the right tool set, I think it's very important in this DevSecOps space.
Okay, sure.
If you look at
Uh,
most of the
yeah.
tools, now in the market are like, rule-based tools. So they look at just the pattern, what is like, create a vulnerability. And if the pattern is available in the code, then they raise it as a, vulnerability. So a lot of times, this might not be applicable for a specific product or a specific project, because they might have a kind of, alternate implementation, either at the infrastructure level or probably at an API gateway level or some kind of thing, right? So the context is something, missing, right? Right. Uh, so the only, let's say when we can say this something is vulnerable, only that can be exploited, from the external side or internal side, right? So mostly like from the application side, right? So when there is an alternate solution or, available at either a network level or infrastructure level, that's where like, people say, okay, this is a false positive, it is not applicable for us. So it's very important to understand the context as well, not just, looking at the code. Sometimes you have some alternate implementation at a different place. So I think that's the biggest challenge for a lot of people, and I think that's where like the at least the Gen AI or LLMs can like add some value. So where a lot of people now are leveraging these capabilities to see how we can solve these problems, to address these false positives. I think some of these will be the false positive, especially the reduction, right, will be reduced a lot, going forward with the help of Gen AI for sure.
Yeah, I think integration of Gen AI, maybe external databases, along with say EPS score, might help in just focusing on what matters the most and reduce false positive. And then if we can integrate remediation management based on what is the finding with a database so that it pops out the remediation. Uh, and if there is an opportunity to contextualize, then it will be of great help and will really make DevSecOps work.
Yeah, absolutely.
One quick question that I have is that if we automated all the security tools to scan all codes, then what happens to minor changes if I'm just updating a privacy policy or I'm just updating few things which are basic workflows and not really interfaces, which does not ingest any security vulnerabilities? Then is it possible to move these minor codes without having security checks so that it does not unnecessarily delay the pipeline? So how do we ensure that?
Yeah, definitely. I think we should also look at the time, because let's say for every small change, if we start scanning the complete code, that is actually going to hamper the developer productivity, and also it will waste a lot of time in the pipelines as well. Because a lot of times, when there is when the developer raises a PR, you have other teams waiting for that, like for to pick up that for testing immediately, right? Sometimes. So it's very important, like to be able to identify where we should do the complete scan, like a full scan, and then or where we can also go for a delta scan. I think it's all again about the efficiency of the tools that we have been using. So right, so if the tool can identify, okay, whether it has to go through a full scan or a differential scan, I think that would actually help the optimizing the time. Because in fact we keep hearing this as a problem from few enterprises. For every small change, it takes like 20 minutes for all the security tests to be completed, right? And sometimes for a big project, people are also spending like 2 to 3 hours, to complete the full suite of security testing. So I think it's very important to like optimize the scan time as well, to make sure the productivity is not impacted.
Sure. And what we also seen is that even though we can centralize all the findings from various security tools in, say, tools like Defect Dojo, which has the capability to integrate your SaaS, DAS, secrets management, SCA outcome. But are there ways by which we can correlate, various findings and see that if there are high risk findings, we can give it to the developers as prioritized output?
Yeah, definitely, CP. One big challenge is definitely the amount of issues, like we spoke earlier, and also the consolidation and the contextualization. So if we are able to provide, good context and prioritize based on some automation, right? And that would definitely add value to them. And also think about in a different way too. What if we are able to provide all of these issues to the developer itself, or the developer itself can look at these issues in a different way as soon as things are done by Zen. So then it's very easy for them to fix them as well without taking a lot of effort. Security teams don't have to get involved for every scans, right? Then it's more of in the developer's hand where they're able to fix these issues. I think that's another school of thought where collaboration needs to happen, and then putting the issues in the developers as soon as possible.
Sure. Now we also see that most of these tools are standalone. When we talk about SaaS, they have secret management, and you just answered that there is a possibility that the outcome of these various tools that are integrated into the pipeline might have certain relevance, and we can see and reconcile and correlate the results. But what about the ops part? Because in ops part, where you have monitoring east-west traffic, vulnerabilities in the container, exceptions, are they also easy to integrate into the same system, or ops part is still ops and then we should leave it separate? But when you're calling it DevSecOps, then we are assuming that the ops part of it, be it vulnerabilities or misconfigurations or east-west traffic, the visibility also comes back. So how do you do that?
I would say in a simple way, like, it depends on the organization, like, how well they are, let's say, implementing DevSecOps practices. I would say it becomes more complex, like, if you start doing things reactive, right? That is where your ops will start seeing a lot of issues, and then you need more people, like, to keep monitoring these, and then, like bringing up, like, processes, how you can actually give this feedback again to the development team, SREs, all of that. But if you can, like, bring these practices to shift left, where we can identify these problems as early as possible, right? So definitely you will have, less number of issues on the ops side, though, we cannot actually avoid the ops part, completely, because you will keep hearing new vulnerabilities, right? All of that, and then ops team has to have complete monitoring. But I think having a shift left approach, either from the development side, right, where you identify all of these vulnerabilities in a very early stage, like under the feature development with help of IDE plugins, or or just by using some tools like, some scanners, like in the pre-commit stage, at least before they check in the code, where they can run all of these kind of, quality controls, and make sure they push the code to the next level, only when there are no vulnerabilities. At the same time, for the SREs or DevOps people who are building the infrastructure as code, right? Like you creating Terraform modules, all of that. If they can also follow the same kind of approach, where they can start following, the best practices from the development stage, I think I would say the number of issues that you will see on the ops side will be reduced, right? So where you can also save a lot of times, I think, the numbers, right? So typically when you actually identify any issues in the production, it takes 10x amount of time to, fix that problem, versus you identify the problem in the dev stage or in the feature development stage, right? So I think it's something, very important, right? To have a lean ops team to monitor, like, all the kind of new vulnerabilities that are, like, let's say, because, so see, sometimes even if your code is not changing, you will get to see the new vulnerabilities. That is because people keep doing research, and then you get to see some new vulnerabilities. That is something, you can identify as a practice. If there is a new rule that has to be, that's something that is identified. So which is actually coming back to the feedback loop, where the ops team can work with, the developers, and then be able to fix. But if people start, using the shift left approach, they can actually identify all of these problems in early stage, rather than, like, in the later stages.
Yeah. Thanks, Satish, and thanks, Sarath. I think that's all I had. A few questions that based on experience which clients ask. So now, naturally, if I have to summarize, first and most important thing is that DevSecOps actually the success will depend on how best security development and operations teams can collaborate and have a shared responsibility. Provide appropriate training to developers on shift left security so that they are understand the importance as well as they have the right tools to do the security assessments. You can do trainings, you can do secure SDLC models, or you can do code bashing, etc. The third and most important thing that I learned is that we can automate as much and optimize the findings. Important is reduction in false positives, maybe using machine learning or past data, and then also providing the remediation to the developers. The fourth thing that I learned is that we can integrate ops also, and the better we can shift security left and identify the issues earlier, the better it will be that the number of findings in the ops will be reduced. And if there are zero-day vulnerabilities or ops issues, that can be identified with, say, application pen test, we can easily integrate into the pipeline. And the last and sixth part is that if we can make it risk-based, by understanding the exploitability as well as understanding the context of the finding and reconcile the finding from multiple tools, then it will be better for the developers to focus what matters the most. So with that, a big thank you to Sarath and Satish for this wonderful discussion. And I look forward to doing another round of discussion on DevSecOps. And I would love to see if there are real, genuine tools available which can automate and solve the problems that we discussed. Thank you very much.
Sure, CP. Thank you so much. It's a great summary. Thanks.
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And also press the bell icon to stay notified of all the future released videos. See you in the next one. Thank you.